Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the LifeRaft Physical Security Podcast. I'm your host, Robert Value. And today I'm joined with Steve Dalton. He's the author of the book, The 2-Hour Job Search, and the recently released The Job Closer. He's also the program director for Daytime Career Services at Duke University. Steve, thanks for joining me today.
Great to be here, Robert.
I wanted to ask right away, because I know there's a great story behind this, but what inspired you to start with the book, The 2-Hour Job Search?
I think two stories. First, I'm a rule follower at heart. I was raised Catholic, so I'm very good at following instructions. I did everything my career centers had ever told me to do, and I got really good at interviewing and preparing resumes and writing cover letters, but I had no idea how to find a job once the career centers went away. So I naturally became a career coach. That's where my obsession began 16 years ago with career coaching, and I ended up going back to my alma mater of Duke's business school called Fuqua. There was a crystallizing moment a couple years in where the 2008 financial crisis hit. And a student lost her job with Bear Stearns when they got acquired by JP Morgan. All the other banks were not hiring because they knew we were headed for the cliff. And she was devastated. She lost her visa, lost her offer. And she asked me, Steve, what do I do? And I said, let's just come up with a list of targets. Let's figure out where you have contacts, all the tips that I was told when I was a student. And she said, how exactly do I come up with a list of targets? Where exactly do I look for contacts? And I realized she had the wherewithal to follow instructions, but not the ability to curate tips into a usable format. And so by giving her tips, I was hurting her. And that made me feel awful. I was a snake oil salesman at that point. I knew I had to either get out of the industry or I had to answer that question for real. And I chose the latter. Thankfully, it only took me several years. But the result of this desire to give myself from many years ago and the student that I couldn't help in that moment a set of instructions for getting interviews from scratch. That's what led to the 2-Hour Job Search.
I love that story. I was flashing back to my own experience in 2008, around the time when I was graduating. You get that standard piece of advice to network. What does that mean? And then you just kind of put it off and start sending out resumes.
Even worse, I get that, just put yourself out there. And I was kind of I'm still an awkward dude, but I was definitely an awkward dude back then. And it was actually putting myself out there was counterproductive. Just kind of winging it had detrimental effects. And so that gave me a very negative connotation of what networking was. Networking's that thing where you put yourself out there and everybody rejects you. And to not have any infrastructure for dealing with it, I just recognized that there was a need for somebody to present networking as a more systematic problem to be solved. I was tired of hearing it described as an art, not a science. Figure it out for yourself. It's trial and error. Here's 50 tips. Go figure it out. I'm the expert. I'm the career coach in the room. I should be the one that can offer a set of instructions for the person who's willing to follow them. But I realized in around 2010 that nobody had done that yet. I assumed somebody else had beaten me to it and nobody had. And so I'm very proud to have come up with a recipe for networking. I just thought it would start a recipe war where other people would come out with competing recipes in the ensuing decade. And it hasn't happened. I'm happy I'm able to contribute this, but I realize there's nothing more important than the ability to pay off your debts and put food on the table for yourself and your loved ones. So it's really fun work to be doing.
Yeah, I was quite excited to have you on because I just think in the security field that I'm based in, it's service members trying to transition from the military into the private sector, or students trying to break into corporate security to begin with, or even just a manager looking for that next step in the career rung. And in our space, it's all about who you know. Hiring managers want to deal with people that they know and trust, and just sending in the resumes doesn't get anywhere. But I think that's very common in a lot of other industries too.
Absolutely.
I want to kind of jump in now into the main topic. I'm thinking about the typical way that most people go about their job search. They log on to LinkedIn, they log on to Indeed, they log on to Monster, they put together a resume, cover letter, and then start sending out dozens and dozens of applications. Explain to me why that's a bad strategy, regardless of where I am in my career.
I think it's just a matter of return on effort. If you spend 8 hours doing that and you are unsuccessful in that 8 hours, you're not 8 hours closer to finding a job, nor have you learned anything in that 8 hours. It's just sort of wasted time. It's like buying lottery tickets to try to pay off your mortgage. I believe in predictable return on effort. That's the only safe way to do this. Now, use your history as a guide. If you are blindly applying online and hearing back more than 5% of the time, go ahead, feel free to keep doing that. But if it's less than 5% of the time, I would argue that the hours and hours you spend looking for new postings, applying very thoughtfully to new postings, even though they're just looking for people who've done the job before but already, but somewhere else, that's just killing your self-esteem. That same amount of time applied to reaching out to smart people to ask them how they got so smart. You'll get stronger with time. Your odds will improve. Brown, Setron, and Topa did a great study at the New York Fed where they found that for every one position that was hired, a blind online job posting application, 12 were hired by internal referrals. So someone at the company already knew. you can't ignore that data. Every time you apply online, not only are you hoping you're one of the handful out of the hundreds who applied online that they choose to interview, you're also hoping it's the 1 out of 13 jobs that goes to the online applicant instead of someone with connections. Faced with that awful stacked on top of terrible set of odds, the awkward chemical engineer in me, because that was my background, bred for awkwardness, has to accept that there has to be a better way. We only have one life. We only have a finite amount of time and effort and pain tolerance. That same amount of time devoted towards reaching out to strangers and setting up informational meetings just vastly outperforms that same amount of time put towards applying to online jobs.
I love those stats that you provided. I remember a number of years ago, I was working at an investment bank and HR came in with a big stack of resumes for one of the hiring managers and 9 inches thick. And he just takes the first half of it. He's got his lunch hour to read it over. And he's just like, chucks them. What I don't think a lot of people even realize is like your resume is most of the time not even getting looked at. There's just so much competition on these online job boards.
You'll hear information, you'll hear about how companies go through your social media to understand, find good candidates. So that leads to this cottage industry about the importance of search engine optimization and keywords and ATS systems. And I've never seen any data that supports that actually helps. I've talked to a number of HR professionals at top employers and asked them, like, when you say you use ATS systems and you do keyword searches, what words are you searching for exactly? And they'll be like, oh, we're trying to find people who are qualified. I'm like, no, what words are you looking for exactly? Well, like for a product manager position. And they'll say, well, we'll look at product manager. And I'm like, will you look up managed versus supervised? And they're like, no, we're looking for people who've done this job before, but somewhere else. Or maybe there's a required computer language that we need you to be able to program in. We'll look up that too. They're looking for objective criteria. They're not looking for wordsmith versions of bullet points. And so many people fall down that resume rabbit hole of thinking that that's so important. And it just really isn't, because those resumes, there's no fair way to review all of them. So are you looking for people who have objective criteria that have done this job before somewhere else and just ignoring the rest, basically? There is another option. So what I do is basically a design thinking approach to relationship building, to networking for the purpose of getting interviews. I didn't know how to do it. I didn't even know how to do it after I became a career coach. And it took the financial crisis of 2008 to make me aware that there was no solution like that out there. So started with a list. How do I make a list? What should be in that list? What criteria should I use to put them into a logical order of attack? Tried different formats until I found something that worked. And then people were like, this list is awesome. Now, how do I reach out to people? And that led to the next set of recipes of like, okay, what should you write to a complete stranger? And who should we be targeting in the first place that is most likely to offer the best results per hour of effort invested? So every step was built by design thinking, trial and error, seeing what works better than other things, and then keeping the stuff that works while ejecting the stuff that doesn't.
What are the biggest benefits? And you've had a lot of great stories that I'm sure you've collected over the years of people who've started to implement this recipe-based approach for networking.
I'll give you 2 stories. I think the easiest to understand is one person I met at a session I was doing. He'd already read the book. He told me a story about how he applied for a consulting firm online and hadn't heard back. He went to my talk at a previous year, started following my process at the same firm, reached out to some people who worked there, got an informational meeting. That informational meeting led to a referral to another person at that company. That informational meeting was a lot easier because they already were friendly. That led to an interview, which led to a final round interview, which led to an offer. And the day after he got the phone call offering him the job, he got the email from the automatically generated system saying, thank you for your interest in our company. Unfortunately, we don't find a match for you. We'll keep your resume in our database. Literally, he was 2 different candidates when he applied online versus network. And that's, in a nutshell, why you need to network. You are 2 different people. As much as we want to think the networking process is fair, it is a different version of fair than most people assume. When people think the job search should be fair, they're thinking the most qualified person should get the job. I would argue it's fair. It's maybe fairer now than it was 20 years ago. But I define fair as who has the ability to acquire a new skill set that makes you more likely to get jobs. And that skill set is, do you have the ability to take strangers and turn them into advocates? And that's used in every single job out there. But it is like the job search suddenly turned into a brand new board game, and only a fraction of the population has bothered to pick up the board game and figure out how to play it. Instead of insisting on, no, I want to play the old board game. It's crazy to me that the answer is available and it's out there, but a lot of people are just so resistant to it because they prefer the devil they know to the devil they don't. So that's the first story. The second story is more of a general anecdote. The benefit is the gain in confidence that you get once you realize that you have the ability to turn strangers into advocates. Yeah, a bunch of people are going to ignore you. And yeah, some people may string you along and not actually ever be helpful. But you will find people that you weren't successfully turned into advocates from scratch who had no reason to help you other than the fact that you asked. And I see people just carry themselves differently once they've had that first taste of success. Once you start projecting optionality, once you realize you have the ability to turn strangers into advocates, it's just a matter of time before you get a job. Companies find that confidence and that optionality irresistible, and you can't fake it. People think, oh, well, I'll just kind of carry myself with confidence. It doesn't work like that. They've become really good at determining which job seekers have other options and which ones don't. So much of the 2-hour job search is about creating optionality for yourself. And your affect and your confidence level definitely changes as you realize this is a proficiency you have now that you didn't have before you started the process.
I really tuned into the thing that you said earlier about the dual track job market. I remember after COVID when I was looking for my next opportunity, and if I was sending stuff out, resumes to big companies, it was this dehumanizing, cold, sterile environment. I would be doing recorded interviews just by myself with no one on the other end, this automated process, and that never actually getting to talk to somebody. And then once you start getting out, talking to people, meet real people, they're really nice at these places. They're not this cold, sterile environment. And what I also really found interesting when I started talking to people was they would give me the cheat sheet in the application process, because you'd be asking, well, what kind of problems are you dealing with? They'll just tell you. And so if you even have to go and apply the normal way, you're writing up that cover letter. The normal cover letter is, hey, I'm so-and-so, hire me. Whereas when you've talked to someone, it's like, hey, I hear you're struggling with A, B, and C. Well, I did A at this company. I did B at this company, and I didn't do C, but I did something similar. I think we should talk. Who are they going to talk to? Who's going to get the interview after that? It's not even close.
I think it's just having the comfort of realizing that you might need to reach out to 5 people before you find the 6th person who gives you the answer key. But on the whole, not only you probably spent the same amount of time you would have spent in aggregate applying for jobs during that same period, but you also got smarter. Like you got smarter not just for that job, but for every one of that company's competitors, because chances are their competitors are facing very similar problems. So not only does it help you get that interview, it helps you get all other interviews too. It's crazy. It's just there's so many good things. It almost feels ridiculous to not network, but I get it. Networking is terrifying. You are putting yourself out there in a very vulnerable position. My goal is to give you a recipe, exact instructions, so you don't feel the personal rejection. You're just playing the odds. You're just following the recipe that Steve told you to cook. And if you cook it this many times, you can expect this many responses. Of those, this many will be helpful. And if you don't like the recipe, feel free to just hate on Steve and hate the recipe and blame the 2-hour job search and try something else. Maybe the recipe isn't good for everybody, but if you don't know where to start with a recipe. Follow somebody else's instructions who's given it thousands of hours of thought, rather than trying to rebuild the wheel from scratch yourself. There's no need for it. It's needlessly painful.
Well, you mentioned the recipe there. So why don't we just give the broad strokes to someone who wants to follow Steve's recipe? Where do I get started on this networking system?
The squishy middle of the job search, I like to call it, because it's the part where people seem to get stuck most. They feel pretty good about their ability to interview and pretty good about their ability to get a resume together, but not great about, like, I just need a chance. How do I get a chance? That's the tricky part. I split that beast into its 3 component parts. First is prioritization. Second is outreach. And third is recruiting advocacy. So step 1, prioritize. I teach job seekers something called the lamp list. It's before you spend dozens of hours networking, let's spend 1 hour doing due diligence to figure out who should we be networking with and in what order of attack and urgency. So you find 40 employers using a variety of brainstorming methods. You find 3 data points for each of them that are easy to find and predictive of success. That helps you identify your top 6, which you would take into the next step of the process, because you'll be networking with 6 simultaneously to avoid getting too beholden or too wound up about whether one company responds to you. Again, we need to project optionality in this process. So that means approaching multiple companies at once. Part 2, the contact portion. We need to identify people who are most likely to be helpful. What I find the single best predictor of who's going to be helpful is functional relevance. If you want to do marketing or if you want to do security, contact security people. Don't contact an alum or a fellow service person who is in a completely different field or in the finance role in the security space. If you want to do the strategy side, find a strategy person who's in that space currently. So focusing on people who are functionally relevant and identifying a kind of person I call boosters. Not everybody's going to be helpful. There is a segment that's never going to respond to you under any circumstance. I call them curmudgeons. They're awful people. They hate babies. They kick puppies. They're the worst. Or they're delightful and they just have no interest in helping you. They at least have the decency to ignore you. The worst group is the obligates, the ones who want to pretend to be helpful to save face, but who don't actually want to be helpful. So they'll set up a meeting with you, but cancel at the last minute. Boosters are ones who are just, tell me you need help and I'm in. They're intrinsically motivated to do that. So I give people a very specific outreach method called the 6-point email and a specific tracking method called the 3B7 routine for identifying boosters at their top target companies as quickly as possible. Then the third segment is the recruiting of advocacy, which basically is an informational meeting. It's the inverse of a job interview. You as the job seeker own the agenda. The TR framework helps you take your partner on a journey to turn them from stranger into friend, into subject matter expert, into mentor. So by asking questions in a particular order, it maximizes the chance you can take them on this journey in a likable way so that they're going to advocate for you in the future. And then we close with the harvest cycle, which tells you how to follow up these conversations to maximize the chance they lead to referrals for interviews.
Going right back to the very beginning in the prioritization list, what I loved about the 40 employer list was it forced me at least to start thinking beyond the normal options. So I think like in the security field, most people are thinking, okay, I want to work at an analyst or a security manager at a Fortune 500 company. And they think McDonald's or Walmart or the names everybody knows. You can rattle off maybe about 5 or 10 in your industry, in your city. But to get 40, you got to fill that out and do more research. And it forces you to start thinking about options you wouldn't have thought of before. The vendors in the space, the suppliers, the consultancy, all these other things. And I think oftentimes we want to start thinking about the names that we know and we think of 5 people, we go out to them. That's great. But that limits us in our thinking from all the ecosystem around of different names and businesses that we might have not have considered at first.
Yeah, it's so nice to hear you say that, Robert. I know people are in trouble when they try to do the 2-hour job search and they come with a list of 5 companies that consist of Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon, and Apple. Like those companies literally have nothing to do with each other. So what you learn from one will not help you with the next one. It just shows a very lazy list. Like, oh, you know what big companies exist. But what you said is exactly right. The first 10 or 15 might be easy, but getting to 40 forces you to really think like, what do I enjoy learning about? If you focus on learning, you get job leads in these conversations. If you focus on job leads, you get neither. So just picking what subsegment of this sector, what element of the sector that I really like that I'm willing to consider smaller and smaller employers. Oddly, the traction you get with the smaller employers helps your odds at the bigger employers because they'll ask you where else you're looking. I love asking that question from job seekers because it lets me know, are people just bouncing around from big name to big name? Implying that they're probably just chasing job postings. Whatever they saw that was open, they applied to. But if they can rattle off, well, I'm considering these smaller players in your space. I'm also interested in this particular subset of your space. That's someone I take way more seriously than someone who just is, oh, in addition to your security firm, I'm also in talks with Amazon and Apple. And like, it doesn't reflect well on you. So having a coherent set of companies, and you may have 2 or 3 different topics that have nothing to do with one another in your lamp list, but just things that you enjoy learning about in your spare time. That's a great sign. If you learn about something in your spare time for free, I want to find a way to get you paid for it. But forcing people to get to 40 before continuing with the recipe is a critical precursor of success in this process.
Well, and then it just also makes you sound more desirable. If you're in the dating game and no one wants to date you, it's hard to get anybody. But there's like other people that are kind of interested. It's like, hey, that person's more attractive all of a sudden, having lots and lots of options.
No one wants to hear, you're the only person in the world I'm interested in. That's not, you don't want to go on a date with that person.
No, it doesn't matter. They could be the nicest person in the world. It's like, what else does everyone else know that I'm missing?
Well, let me call my friend.
Yeah. In terms of creating these types of informational interviews, one thing I've heard from people when I've talked about this approach is they kind of don't know where to get started with those or what are they supposed to talk about? What do you recommend to your students?
For an informational interview?
Yeah.
First, don't feel bad. You've never been taught to do this. Everybody's probably told you should be doing informational interviews, but exactly how? They always leave that part out, which frustrates me. Again, I'm in a better position to curate a recipe for doing informational interviews than you are if you're doing your 1st or 5th or 10th job search. I've literally overseen thousands of them. So I've created a framework called Tiara, which helps you systematically take people on a journey. If your first question was, how do I get a job at your company? The informational is over. So we kind of know that that's not a good question to ask, but what should we ask instead? Well, if you ask them, if your first question is, what advice do you have for someone trying to break into your field? That may be a good question later in the informational, but as your first question, that's a little bit weird. It's a little bit too forward, and I don't know if I like you yet. Plus, I'm not thinking creatively yet. So what Tiara does, it uses small talk to establish likability. You want your partner to be rooting for you. You use the first 2 topics. Tiara is an acronym, of course. T and I stand for trends and insights. Trend questions are big macro questions, and insight questions are a little bit more personal. You want to ask a macro question before you ask anything personal, but you want to ask questions that are fun and flattering to answer. So instead of asking them what the corporate culture is like at their firm, which is the worst question ever. Yeah, I'm not an expert on my firm and you're asking me to laundry list things that are on the website. So like, don't just stop. If you're going to ask that question, ask it in a fun and flattering way. Like, what's your favorite part of the corporate culture at your firm? At least that's like, I'm a world's foremost expert on my favorite things. And I'll talk about something that's flattering to me rather than try to remember the 8 pillars of greatness from the website. But macro question, like, what trend is most impacting your business right now? Or how do you think business will be most different post-COVID? Things where people don't want to give you a bad answer because you're asking them, why are you so smart at your job, essentially? So that's priming creativity, which will, when you later ask them for advice, which is the first A in Tiara, they're going to give you more creative advice. Priming is actually a very effective tool for creativity. So if you get people to engage in creative tasks, they become more effective in creative projects. brainstorming tasks later, for example. And then we get to resources, which is where you look to get smarter. Sometimes they'll give you names, which is our goal, also known as a referral. Most people aren't going to give you a referral without checking with that referral that it's okay to do so first, however. So you may need to pivot and ask them for sort of resources for information to get smarter. Newsletters you should sign up for. And then assignments is the last day, and that's what's been your favorite project so far and why. So you can start building a mental toolbox of projects you'd be asked to do for a particular company. I don't know of any other recipes for informational meetings. So people ask me, what other recipes are out there? And I just really don't know anyone that's been as neurotic as me to try to take this art and turn it into as close to a recipe as possible. Everybody likes to stick at that list of ingredients kind of level. So if you're looking for a playbook, a set of instructions where you can just shut your brain off and focus on listening really well, asking good follow-up questions, that's the most important part of a good informational. Tiara would be what I'd recommend.
Everyone wants to feel like an expert. Ask me, what are the trends that I'm watching? Where do I see the business going in 5 years? Useful insight for the interviewee to hear about, but then you're kind of flattering this other person. What do you geek out over? Tell me about that. And who doesn't like to do that?
Exactly. You might be the only person as a job seeker who asked this person like where they think this market is headed this year. That's so nice. It's such a fun question to answer. I don't know if you've ever been asked that question. It feels great to get it. Oh, where do I think it's headed? That's a great question. You have very good taste in who you ask questions from. It's so nice to realize that you've learned something in a given year. So people get self-conscious when they think about doing informational meetings. Like, I'm imposing on somebody. Well, if you take a sell yourself approach, you definitely are. But if you take a learning approach, you're actually doing them a favor. You're making them feel great about themselves. You're asking them why they're so smart, and you're listening attentively to the answer. So it's a gift you can give someone, letting someone know that they've been deeply heard, listened to. Especially during COVID times, this time of great separation where we can't be with our loved ones the way we want to. It's easy to feel invisible. So to give someone the chance to feel truly seen, even when their bosses and their bosses' bosses may not have ever stopped to say thank you for all the great work you put in during this really difficult period. That is a genuine gift you can give a stranger. So it's the opposite of imposing on people if you take the right approach to it, a learning forward approach.
The word that I clued in there was taking a sales approach. And so I think that was kind of an interesting concept to unpack. So I think that could be a mistake that a lot of people might make in these informational sessions. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, I think there are plenty of qualified people for every job. I think that's why there literally get hundreds of applicants for an online job posting. Some of them are qualified, some of them are not. If I'm a rational hiring manager, I'm not getting promoted based on picking the best resumes out of a stack of 500. I'm getting promoted on all the other work I'm supposed to be doing instead. So I'm looking for the most rational way to carve through all those resumes, which means looking up the job title I'm trying to hire for and doing a search on that. Let's consider people who've done this job before somewhere else. And if we can't hire from that pool, we'll hire from friends of people who currently work here. Since if it's a terrible hire, I can blame the person who brought them into the organization. It doesn't look bad on me. For me, I think it's really important to recognize kind of how that system works. There are plenty of qualified people for every open position that's out there. So finding a qualified person that could be taught the job is not a problem for employers. Therefore, if you're using your time while you're networking to sell someone on why you could do the job, they already kind of assume you could do the job. They can teach you what you need to know. They just really hope that they don't have to. So they're looking for people who've already done this job before, but somewhere else. Now, if they can't find one of those, they're going to ask people who already work at the company, who do you know and trust? Well, give me some recommendations of people who aren't going to blow up here and break the organization. They'll be good cultural fits. And that way, if we choose one of those and that person doesn't work out, it's not my fault as the hiring manager. It's the fault of whoever suggested them in the first place. So I'm safe. I can keep my job. The sales approach, recognize that when you're networking with people, the reason people are networking with you is not because they think the stock price is going to jump the day you start. They're not expecting to get a gigantic bonus in their paycheck because they help bring a new entry-level person or even a more experienced person into the organization. It needs a really hot economy for that to happen. Or a startup who's growing really fast, they may have like incentives like that, but most companies don't. So you in an interview is not assuring someone that you're qualified. It's getting someone to like you enough to be willing to incur the risk to their personal brand, their social capital, to say your name is like, I think this person might be pretty decent, and convince their organization to give you an hour of time to consider whether you might be or not. The problem is not that they don't have enough qualified candidates. Everybody appears qualified. The problem is that they don't have enough candidates they trust because they're all strangers. So sell yourself is it's a backward approach to the problem we're trying to solve, which is getting somebody inside the organization to recommend you. They don't have an incentive to take that risk if you're qualified. There are tons of other qualified people. They do have an incentive to take that risk if they like you.
As I was thinking about that, especially if you're someone like a student trying to break in or military trying to get to private sector, I'm just thinking your resume doesn't even pop up in a lot of these screens because if you've done anything government, it doesn't hit any of those keywords in the private sector, but you get around a lot of those issues when you come in with the relationship side of things. And now you have the chance to get in front of people and talk versus you're automatically screened out when you are applying on Indeed.
Exactly right.
Steve, we are coming up on all the time that I promised to steal from you today. Why don't you tell our listeners about one of the interesting projects that you've been working on right now?
Honestly, it's been the end of a 4-year-long marathon of writing. So the 2-Hour Job Search first came out in 2012. Writing is a very difficult, some might say painful process for me. It's a lot of vulnerability, and I'm not a writer. I was a humor columnist in college. That's the extent of my writing experience. I'm a good coach. I'm an okay writer, but I really do pour my heart in the page and feel very strongly about this topic. So writing is exhausting. After 8 years, though, the recipe had changed enough. As thousands of people cooked it, people found ways to do it slightly better, and that became part of the new canon. So the recipe had changed enough after 8 years where I'm like, yes, let's put out an update. I don't want to do it every year. I think it's cruel to ask job seekers who are looking to make money to pay money. It's totally backwards. So my goal in writing a book was to give anyone with a library card access to the same material my MBA students were getting. And I'm really happy to have stood by that goal. So in 2020, the revised edition of the 2-Hour Job Search came out. But I had, over the last, in my 16 years of being a career coach, I developed other recipes too for those other steps of the job search, before and after what the 2-Hour Job Search covers, that squishy networking in the middle phase. So I have frameworks for creating a resume effectively, choosing what you want to do, writing a cover letter efficiently, tell me about yourself in an interview, answering why this company well in an interview, negotiating your offer, and so on. And in 2021, I didn't want to take any time off after writing the revised edition because I knew I'd dread going back to that place to try to crank out a second book after a year off. So just 4 years straight through, I wrote both books. The Job Closer just came out in April of this year, and it's a collection of all of my other recipes for every other step of the job search. So if you find a more prescriptive, specific rule-based approach for every task you're going to face in the job search, definitely check it out. It will challenge some of the assumptions you have about the terribleness of the job search, and it will reduce a lot of things that are giving you great anxiety to just a series of fill-in-the-blank type scripts.
I love the 2-Hour Job Search, so I'm going to give the Job Closer definitely a read. Steve, how can listeners get in touch with you if they want to reach out?
Awesome. I'm on Twitter at Dalton_Steve. I also have a LinkedIn group called the 2-Hour Job Search and the Job Closer Q&A Forum. There's about 8,500 of us now. It's where I answer questions from readers and practitioners and post updates. So if you want to stay current, that's a great place to keep in touch. You can follow me on LinkedIn. Those are probably the 3 best ways to get in touch with me. Also, if you are curious about either of my books, please visit 2hourjobsearch.com or thejobcloser.com.
All right, Steve, thanks for joining me today.
My pleasure, Robert. Thanks for having me.
Again, that was Steve Dalton, author of the book, The 2-Hour Job Search. Thanks again for listening to another episode of the LifeRap Physical Security Podcast. Never miss an episode by subscribing on Apple, Spotify, or wherever else you listen to podcasts. I hope you tune in next time.